Welcome to the American Railroading Podcast, brought to you by the Revolution Rail Group, live from the great state of Texas. Join us as we educate, entertain, and explore the world of American railroading. Here's your host, industry veteran, Don Walsh.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the American Railroading Podcast. I am your host, Don Walsh, President and CEO of the Revolution Rail Group. We are the anchor sponsor for the American Railroading Podcast. We provide consulting and brokering services to the railcar industry. So if you need any kind of consulting whatsoever, whether it's process flow analysis, market analysis, we can help you with that. We can also help you with buying, selling, and leasing of rail cars. You can reach out to us at 844-455-3434 or info@therevolutionrailgroup.com. You can also check out our full suite of services on our website at therevolutionrailgroup.com. Well, I can't believe the holiday season is upon us. This year has flown by, and this episode will be airing on or near Halloween. So I know you guys are all getting ready with your kiddos for Halloween. John, are you getting ready to hang out with your son for Halloween this year?
Oh, you know it.
Nice. You dressing up?
Yeah, I'm not sure what yet. He's got like this cool weird ninja costume, so
nice.
I'll probably play off of that somehow.
Nice. Little Mortal Kombat or something.
Exactly, yeah.
So as you can see, those of you that are watching on our YouTube channel, you see I have a little Frankenstein over here, and this was inspired by someone I saw at church this weekend. The song Be My Frankenstein came to mind when I saw this gentleman walk out the door of church, Alice Cooper. Now, I am 99.9% sure that's who this was. No makeup, hair pulled back, but the leather pants kind of gave it away. And I didn't want to bother him. He was being surrounded by people that apparently recognized him as well. But I'm like, man, what would he be doing here in the Woodlands, Texas, on a Sunday afternoon? And then not last night, we're recording on later on in the week, but it was that night I saw a post about the concert that he was doing at the Cynthia Woods Pavilion with Judas Priest. So it was indeed Alice Cooper. I will swear by it. And hence the little Be My Frankenstein here hanging out with us for our episode today. So Alice, thanks for coming to church. We loved having you. Come back anytime. And everybody be safe. Have a fun Halloween. I'm going to have probably 800 kids coming by the house. We have 750 some odd homes in our neighborhood, and they show up in truckloads and golf cart loads. So I always look forward to that every year. Thanks to all of you. We continue to remain in the top 10% for all podcasts in the world, which is truly incredible and truly a blessing. We've now been downloaded in 58 countries around the world and on 38 different podcast platforms. So we've increased even since our last episode. All-time downloads, the U.S. is still number 1, Canada number 2, Australia number 3, and in this last month, U.S. is number 1. U.K. has jumped into second place now. Canada is third, and our new friends in the Ivory Coast are close behind. So you just started listening to us, and you're already jumping in there. So thank you for that. Hello to our friends in Australia, South Africa, and Brazil. Please continue to download, subscribe, share, and leave us reviews. So I know I say it every episode, but the reviews really help us a bunch, especially 5-star reviews. So if you like what we're doing, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us get further and further out in the algorithms on the interwebs and gets more people aware of us. So please continue to do that. Also, if you like what you heard on the podcast, you can leave us, or you can buy us, you can leave us coffee too, I suppose, somehow, but you can buy us a cup of coffee, and you do that by going to our website at americanrailroading.net. You see a little yellow coffee cup in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. You can click on that, and you can buy us 5 cups, 10 cups, or however many cups of coffee you want. It's like leaving us a tip for doing a good job. So if you'd like to do that, please do. Thank you to those of you that have, and those of you that will. Don't forget, we have our own YouTube channel as well. So some of you like to watch the podcast episodes versus listening to them. You can do that by going to our website at americanrailroading.net and clicking on the videos tab, or you can go to YouTube at American Railroading Podcast. Again, that's YouTube at American Railroading Podcast. Be sure to check out our online store, especially now that it's getting cooler out. We all got all kinds of hats and hoodies and pullovers and you name it. They're on there. Winter caps, so when you're out there shoveling snow. I won't be doing that. We use a leaf blower in the winter here in Texas. Sorry about your luck. But I will be thinking of you as you buy the hats for wintertime and the pullovers and hoodies. And you can do that again on our website at americanrailroading.net and click on the stores tab and shop to your heart's desire. We also have challenge coins. If you're familiar with challenge coins, I actually have some here on the desk if you're watching on our YouTube channel. And the one right up in front is our challenge coin for the American Railroaders, and you can check that out on our website as well. And a portion of the sales of those challenge coins goes toward our friends at Boots for Troops. So we're continuing to see tremendous increases in audio and video downloads, as well as increases in YouTube subscribers. It's truly been incredible. In the last 12 months, we've seen a 222% increase in audio downloads, a 140% increase in YouTube subscribers, and a 171% increase in video watch time. And there's been a consistent increase month over month. So for Q3 2025, we've set records for the highest downloads in our history, and October has already beaten the highest. So we're going to, even after this episode, we're just going to crush it. So thank you guys. That is all thanks to you and downloading and sharing. So please continue to help us out by doing that. You can also promote your company brand with a podcast sponsorship. So we have a platinum sponsorship, gold sponsorship, and several silver sponsorships available. So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor of the American Railroading Podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can reach out to us today at marketing@americanrailroading.net. Again, marketing@americanrailroading.net. And we'd love to share the different sponsorship packages that are available to you. We announced our third annual Honor Our Heroes Award winner last episode. So in case you missed it, our winner for this year is Tina Garcia. Tina is a rail account manager for Hempel Coatings right here in Conroe, Texas. It was not rigged, I promise you. I pulled the name live on the air, but she just happens to be right here in Conroe, so I will hand deliver this award to her here by Christmas. Tina was a Navy religious programming specialist stationed at Naval Weapons Station, Earl, New Jersey, attached, I'm probably going to get this wrong, Tina, and I apologize if I do, but attached to the Kamlagren 2 Squadron, supporting the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet. So please be sure to congratulate Tina when you see her out. She's always at the different conferences and events, SWARS, Mars, NEARS, you name it, Sears, Tank Car Committee. She's at all different meetings. So please be sure to congratulate her and thank her for her service when you see her. Also, thank you to Boots for Troops here in Magnolia, Texas for sponsoring the award again this year. Thank you so much. So our episode today is the first ever with a guest representing a railroader, in this case, several railroads. And I'm really excited to have him on today and talk about short lines. Our guest for today is Chuck Baker. Chuck is president of the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association, otherwise known as the ASLRRA, based in Washington, D.C. Mr. Baker joined the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association as president in February of 2019. In his first 15 years prior to joining ASLRRA, Chuck was a partner at Chambers, Conlin, and Hartwell, CC&H, a lobbying firm based in Washington, D.C., specializing in government affairs management, representing transportation clients before the federal government, including Congress and administrative agencies such as the DOT, FRA, STB, DHS, and TSA. I couldn't fit any more acronyms in there, Chuck. I'm sorry. I'm sure there's more than that, but there's a bunch. So he's been pretty busy. While at CC&H, Chuck represented clients such as the National Railroad Construction and Maintenance Association, where he also served as president, the ASLRRA, the One Rail Coalition, the American High-Speed Rail Alliance, the American Railway Development Association, Genesee and Wyoming, Herzog Contracting Corp., and more. Chuck has significant experience in freight rail, passenger rail, rail transit, and rail industry contractor and supplier legislative and regulatory issues. Chuck currently serves as a board member of the Short Line Safety Institute and chairman of the board of the One Rail Coalition. Mr. Baker is a native of Baltimore, Maryland, and a graduate of Rice University here in Houston, Texas, with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Psychology and Policy Studies. Chuck lives on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Sarah, and two daughters, Nora and Lila. And with that, I say welcome, Chuck, to the American Railroading Podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here. Appreciate the full intro. And it is fun to hear you talking about Houston. I've been to concerts in that pavilion you're talking about. That was a long time ago when I was in college, but it's a great spot.
Cynthia Woods is so much fun. It's a blast. And there's all the restaurants and things around there. There's a lot of people that just sit outside in the park and listen to the concerts for free. You can do that too and have a little picnic, which is pretty cool.
Right.
But I wish I'd have said hello to Alice, so maybe he'll be listening to the podcast and send me a note, but didn't want to bother the guy. But I want to start out by saying that just kind of get this out there, that you are a Baltimore Ravens fan and you whooped the Chicago Bears this last weekend as we're recording now. And yeah, that wasn't good, but God bless you. And you're getting your quarterback back this week.
Yeah, we are, I think, the best 2-5 football team in NFL history. And, we'll see. I think we're going to give the Steelers and Bengals a little run for their money, and I wouldn't count us out quite yet. Although it's been a we get spoiled as as Ravens fans. It's been a great 20 years, and it's been a rough 2 months so far.
Well, you certainly got the youngest quarterback of the group, so,
Yes.
and the most mobile. So I'll be pulling for you, man. I promise I will. So what made you decide to become a lobbyist in the first place?
Yeah, great question. It wasn't actually the lobbyist part that attracted me at first. It was really the transportation part and the rail part. My first job out of college was actually investment banking, which I was doing out in San Francisco. That was my first job out of Rice. And I was doing tech, like M&A and corporate finance. And I didn't love it. And, like a lot of people, my introduction to the working world was 70, 80-hour weeks. And I was like, well, boy, your job is a pretty big part of your life. Like, I should probably find something I'm actually interested in doing. Or otherwise, this is going to be kind of a painful life here. And so I thought about what I was interested in, and it had always been, very broadly speaking, like transportation, land use, urban planning, like something around that sphere. And I didn't really know exactly what, but I knew that there was a lot of that in Washington, D.C. And like you said in the bio, I'm from Baltimore, so D.C. is like close to home, but not exactly home. So seemed like a good place to move. And I moved to D.C., and I looked at all sorts of stuff. I've talked about working for WMATA, the transit agency. I talked about going to airline consulting firms. I talked to the airports. I talked to Congress. I talked to the Government Accountability Office doing studies. And eventually I kind of stumbled through a friend of a friend into Chambers, Conlon, and Hartwell and helping manage the Rail Contractors Association. And I interviewed there, and they were kind of like, so you want to be a rail lobbyist? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, close enough. Like, yeah, that's like sort of in the world of what I'm interested. And they said, you don't have any of the skills we're looking for. You don't have any of the qualifications we're looking for, but you're here, and we needed somebody 2 months ago. And if you're willing to take a 60% pay cut from your investment banking job, you can start tomorrow. And I was like, sold. And so I started the next day, and that kicked off a 15-year career at CC&H and all sorts of rail clients. And, it's kind of a niche field. And so you hang out for a few years, and you listen to people who know what they're talking about and go to conferences. And it was a little before podcasts, but you listen to things and you read and you try to pay attention. And all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 years in, people are like, oh, you're an expert in rail lobbying. I was like, okay, if you say so. And I've just loved it ever since. And now I'm in sort of a dream job getting to run the trade association for short line railroads.
Yeah, it sounds like it worked out pretty darn well. And I want to backtrack just a little bit. How did you end up at Rice University in Houston from Baltimore?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Sort of an unusual choice from Baltimore, but I wanted to go somewhere good, and I wanted to go somewhere south. Partially, if you want like the good version, partially it's because I didn't want to like follow all my prep school friends go into Ivy Leagues and William and Amherst and places like that. If you want the slightly more honest version, like I really don't like being cold. So I wanted, I looked at like Rice and Emory and Vanderbilt and Tulane and UNC and Duke and UVA. And I visited Rice, and it's just like this beautiful kind of Mediterranean style campus, and real good reputation. And it was like 70 degrees and sunny during Thanksgiving weekend when I visited, and I was like, yeah, this will do just fine for college. And no regrets. I loved Rice. I was a little more social science heavy. It's very, very math and science and engineering heavy school. So I was just surrounded by people much smarter than I am, which I think is a comfortable place to be, and a good, if I'm doling out life advice here, surrounding yourself with people smarter than you is a pretty good ticket. And so Rice just worked out great in that sense. I never really thought I would live in Texas, and I have not, in fact, lived in Texas, but it was fabulous to spend 4 years there.
My mentor, Joe Schischler Sr., told me the same thing you just said. Don't be intimidated by smarter people being around you. Embrace that. And I've always tried to live by that. So I totally agree. So it sounds like you had opportunities to be in lobbyist for transportation in general, but you've created a focus on rail over time. So what drew you to rail particularly?
Yeah, if you had asked me when I came to CCNH, I would have certainly been attracted to rail, but I would have thought more about passenger rail and high-speed trains and rail transit and commuter trains and that's obviously easier, as a consumer of trains, right, of like transportation services. That's easier to understand when you're kind of a kid entering the field. Like I'd been on overnight trains in Europe and I'm like, oh, what a cool way to get from Paris to Berlin or whatever you're doing. And of course, rode the New York subway and BART and things like that. And it was like, oh, what an important part of urban life and moving people around, and it's safer and it's better for the environment and it's better for mobility and it's better for your pocketbook because you don't have to own a car. And so I was sort of attracted to it from that sense. But then I got to CCNH and most of the clients, it turns out, are actually on the freight rail side. And that's actually, as you get to know railroading in the United States, that's where most of the rail business is in the United States, and certainly where most of the rail money is in the United States is on the freight rail side. And there are a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap about why I think it's so fun to represent freight railroads. There's a lot of actually overlap with the passenger and the transit side. It's great for the economy. It's great for mobility, right? We're taking trucks off of the roads. We're opening up the roads for people to move around more freely. It's fabulous for the environment. I'm aware, obviously, in DC that like the environment is not quite the hot topic here in fall 2025 that it was in fall 2024. But frankly, that stuff comes and goes. And just as a human, like I think we're all interested in like clean air and clean water. And I just feel really great about how freight railroads are such an efficient way to move heavy goods. And it is far, far safer, right? So not only are we taking trucks off the road in a way that helps mobility and helps the environment, but it also saves lives. I mean, without being corny and dramatic about it, but rail is 3 to 20 times safer than trucking, depending on what you're measuring, whether you're measuring accidents, injuries, equipment damage, or fatalities. There's different ways to measure it, but rail is far, far safer than trucking. And so when we can help move more freight by rail, we're literally saving lives. It is a real like epidemic of death, just to be blunt about it, on America's highways. People get used to it, but it is 40,000 people a year die on America's roads. That's a staggering number of people. It's over 100 a day, and about 5,000 of those are connected to heavy truck crashes. And so I feel really good about anything we can do to help take trucks off the road and move freight on rail, on a dedicated private right of way. And so all of that, I really feel like I'm, I get obviously that I'm biased and I'm paid to say all this stuff, but I really do feel like I'm working for the good guys and feel good about, and I'm sure, we can get into some of the policy, whether we're talking about grants or taxes or regulations, but I feel good about what we're asking for actually means good things for the earth and for people.
I totally agree. And you've worked with several associations over the years, and you made a decision to work with the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. So what made you decide to focus on them?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to oversell like how much an individual is in charge of their own career, right? Like some of it is you're right place and right time, and you take the opportunities as they come. For a long time, I was president of the Rail Contractors Association, which is folks like Herzog and Railworks and Balfour Beatty and Kiewit and L.B. Foster and Koppers and folks that help build and maintain rail infrastructure. And that was fabulous. I love those folks, still very close to a lot of them. And that was a great group to represent. But I was also doing lobbying work at the same time for the short line railroads. That was one of CCH's biggest clients and sort of a signature client. And then a lady named Linda Darr used to have this job as president of the association, and I was, her contract lobbyist reporting to her. And then she got offered a different job at the American Council of Engineering Companies. So she left. And then the short line folks needed a new president, and they looked around and they're like, well, I got this guy who he's our chief lobbyist and he's been president of another rail association, and that seems like a reasonable way to go. And so I was thrilled to get that offer. And, it is, to me in my career, it was kind of a new step up, representing the short line railroads. They are a third of America's freight rail network, almost 50,000 miles of track. They're in 49 states. They move, they've got thousands and thousands of customers. They are a big part of America's freight rail network. And so getting to be, the president of the association is a real honor and a blessing. And frankly, and I think some of my bosses will probably listen to this podcast, so I shouldn't brag about this, but it's one of the easier gigs in DC in the sense that everybody really likes short lines, right? And they don't like them because of what I do at the association or what my team does. They like them because of what the short lines do. And we'll get into this, but they're, your scrappy, local, entrepreneurial, kind of first mile, last mile railroads. And so the customers like them. And because the customers like them, the state DOTs like them, the state representatives, the congressmen, the senators, the US DOT, the FRA, the STB, all these folks kind of like short lines for what they do. And so I just get to kind of tell the story over and over again and ask for, help organize the asks and try to be productive in DC. But it's a pretty friendly place to be. I'm not one who wants to have a job full of conflict and fighting. And this is there's nobody who really wants to fight with short line railroads. Everyone kind of likes them.
Well, and you brought up some of the amazing statistics earlier, and we're going to get into that in a greater detail as we go along. So I think people are going to be blown away by how much short lines are involved in what we do as a rail industry. So most people know the Class 1 railroads by name: UP, BNSF, CSX, Norfolk Southern, Canadian National, and CPKC. What defines a railroad as a Class 1 railroad? What makes them a Class 1?
Yeah, well, you named the big six, right? And so technically, class is actually a revenue distinction, which not a lot of people know. So basically, roughly over $1 billion of revenue in a year makes you a Class 1 railroad. Between about 50 million a year and $1 billion makes you a Class 2 railroad, and then under 50 million a year, all the way down to a couple $100,000 in a year would make you a Class 3 railroad. And so there are actually, like you said, there's 6 Class 1 railroads, and then there's 600 short line railroads. So, most people are like, what? I don't know any of them. And so there are, in fact, 600 of them. The average one might be maybe $8 to $10 million in revenue. Of those 600, 580 of them are Class 3 railroads, sort of the smallest chunk. And then there's about 20-ish that are Class 2 railroads, or sometimes people call them regional railroads. And some people may have heard of a few of those, like Florida East Coast, Wheeling and Lake Erie, Rapid City and Pierre, Buffalo and Pittsburgh, Iowa Interstate Railroad. So there are a few kind of more prominent Class 2 railroads, but basically we call anything that's not a Class 1, just collectively, we call them short line railroads.
So how would you describe the role of a short line railroad or a regional railroad? And is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, so I guess answering the second question first, regional railroads in general would be considered bigger, right? And there's sort of an analogy, although it's more art than science. You could kind of say a regional railroad is a Class 2 railroad and a short line railroad is a Class 3 railroad. But really, we basically, frankly, we don't use the term regional railroad a whole lot. Most people just say anything that's not one of those 6 Class 1s you named is a short line railroad. And obviously, there's a pretty big difference between the multi-$100 million, multi-100 mile Florida East Coast Railway versus the Everett Railroad in Pennsylvania that's a few miles long and like, maybe like low single digit millions probably, but collectively they're all short lines to us. So what's the role? So probably the easiest way to think of the role is like branch lines, right? So if you think of the class ones as the main trunk lines, or if you want to use a highway analogy, think of the class ones as the interstate railroads, and then think of the short lines as like the local roads coming off of them. Or like the tree analogy we use a lot, like the class ones are the trunk and then short lines are the branch. Or other people, sometimes we use like the airline analogy, like class ones are flying the main long point-to-point routes like United and American and Delta. And then you've got short lines who are like United Express and American Eagle, like the little kind of going off the main lines into small town and rural America. A lot of kind of dead ends off of the main line, like 50 miles off of connecting to a UP main line and going 50 miles into rural New Mexico and picking up the 6 customers there. And so, their goal, their job really is to be that first and last mile. So to originate the freight that it lives in those small town and rural areas, or to terminate it, either way, to take it off of the class 1 main line and get it to the customer, or get it from the customer and get it on to the main line. And it's a pretty beautiful, and we can get into kind of how these were formed and the Staggers Act in 1980, but it is a pretty beautiful kind of win-win partnership where the class ones, they do this long haul, big trains, long distances. They do it incredibly efficiently. And, whether you have your criticisms of the class 1 railroads or not, pretty much inarguably, it is the world's premier freight rail system. But they're just not set up, and the cost structure is too high, and the locomotives are too nice, and the people are paid too well to really be able to do, go off of the main line and go do that super labor intensive, customer intensive, high touch pickup and drop off and switching of every little customer in every little small town. But nobody wants to abandon those customers and abandon those towns. So what you do is you essentially spin off this short line to, you either lease it or you sell it to a local entrepreneur, and then they can take this 50-mile rail line and they can use, used locomotives instead of new locomotives. And they can have one guy who's like the conductor of the train, and he also maintains track on his off days. And he's also the safety supervisor, and he also does some of the office paperwork. And you got the owner, she owns the railroad, and her husband maintains the office and does the finances. And, you kind of make it work in this scrappy way. Like I said, used locomotives, maybe relay rail, which is a fancy word for used rail, right? Sometimes even used ties, although less frequently with that. And you can kind of, you run slower trains, like you run them at 10 miles per hour frequently, not 70 miles per hour. And you kind of make it work, and you run the whole thing leaner with a lower cost structure, or much more of a focus on customer service. And you gather up all that traffic, you pre-block it, you go hand it to your class 1 partner, and then they take it 1,000 miles to the final destination. And it's a pretty fabulous win-win. The customer's happy, short line's happy, class 1's happy, town's happy, regulators are happy. And so that's what we do.
I like the way you mentioned about the county roads and such, because here in Texas we have FM roads, FM 1488 and stuff like that, farm to market, and that's what it kind of reminds me of, is something like that.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and in fact, at some level, short lines carry all the same stuff the class 1s carry, but it is particularly heavy in kind of ag and energy and metals and minerals and manufacturing, kind of the industrial stuff. We do mostly like the carload business, not really the intermodal business. That mostly is kind of a class 1 only side of the business. But the farm to market is a great analogy. We move a ton of agricultural products.
For sure. I remember when living in the Midwest, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And I'm going to ask, is there an easier way to say ASLRRA? Do people just blow through?
I generally say in DC, most people would just say Short Line Association. Yeah.
That's true. Well, okay. The Short Line Association was founded in 1913. So can you tell the audience a little bit about who founded the association and why it was created in the first place?
Yeah. Well, at some level, and Short Line Association was pretty early, but at some level, like everyone's got an association, right? So here we are in 2025, and this town is lousy with associations. Like everything you can imagine needs a group kind of representing them in DC. So if I just look at there is a music association, there is a guitar maker association, there are flag maker associations, there are sports apparel associations, there are furniture associations, there's lighting associations, there's the Association of Water Companies, there's the paper associations, there's warehousing associations. So at some level, everyone's got an association, and they all, they largely all exist for the same reason, right? Is that you have all these companies that are out there doing their job on a daily basis, right? We got 600 short line railroads out there that don't really need my help to pick up and drop off stuff from their customers. But it is a heavily regulated industry. There's lots and lots of rail safety regulation at the Federal Railroad Administration. There's also regulation at PHMSA. These are some of the acronyms you tick through in my bio. There's PHMSA and TSA, which is part of DHS. And there's also the STB, which has the whole economic regulatory side of the business. And then there's, of course, Congress, which has tax credits, grant programs, rail safety legislation, truck size and weight rules. And all of these, all of the rules, good or bad, and the grant programs, which are good, and the tax credits, which are good, and the safety rules, which can be mixed. Some of them are fine, but we don't want to do too much. All of that provides the context for the industry's ability to succeed or not. And realistically, like an individual company can't be that effective dealing with the entire federal government. But collectively, they can all get together and say, hey, if we each, if there's 600 of us and we each put in, $10,000, then that's $6 million $6 million. And we can use that to hire a whole staff of people in DC who can actually learn all this and go represent us full time. And so none of them would ever want to spend that money on their own, but collectively they hire us. And so that's really why associations exist. Now they tend to do other things too, right? Like we also have, and we can get into this too, we have training seminars and webinars and events and weekly newsletters. And there's a lot of sharing of best practices and committees for people to kind of learn from each other, and, awards to honor the best amongst us, and veterans awards and safety person of the year awards and a short line railroad hall of fame. So there's all sorts of fun stuff you can do with an association once it forms, but really the main job is government affairs at the end of the day. And that's why, nobody would say Washington, D.C. is the center of railroading in the United States, right? Most people would say that's Chicago or New Orleans, maybe, or Kansas City or something like that. But all the trade associations basically are in D.C. And that's why, because that's where DOT is, and that's where STB is, and that's where Congress is.
And that makes total sense. And we are going to get into every bit that you guys offer as for members as we go on further in the podcast, especially toward the end. We're going to go through every detail. It's great. So right now I want to take a moment and recognize our gold sponsor, EnviroServe. EnviroServe is America's premier provider of comprehensive, reliable, effective, and eco-friendly environmental solutions for the rail industry. Their rail services include mobile rail car cleaning, flaring, interior blasting and transloading, removal and replacement of tank car service equipment, and leak testing. Complete HAZ and non-HAZ waste handling, management, remediation, and disposal services, 24/7 emergency spill response, and more. To learn more, please visit their website at www.enviroserve.com. So who is the ASLRRA?
Well, So we're made up of, there are about 1,000 member companies. About 600 of those roughly are railroads themselves. And so that's, we count each individual short line as their own member, even if they are owned collectively by the same holding company. So for instance, Watco, which is the second biggest short line railroad holding company, they control about 40 short lines in like 20 plus different states, but each one of those short lines is its own kind of individual member of the association. So it's about 600 short line railroads, and then about 450 or so suppliers. We call them associate members. And so there are people who sell stuff to railroads, basically. A lot of my old friends from the rail contractors days, you got Herzog and Railworks, and you've got Coppers and LB Foster, and you've got executive recruiting companies, and you got magazine folks, and you've got insurance companies, and you've got, the whole kind of ecosystem around railroads. And so those people join the association, I think, for two reasons. One, on a very practical, like business kind of 101 level, like they're trying to have access to their customers, right, and support their association. But then two, also, I think they appreciate, if I can speak for them a little bit, they appreciate what we do to help the industry, and they recognize that anything that helps the industry helps their customers, and presumably helps their customers buy more from them. So that's essentially the members of the association. And then we have staff. We have like 17 people who are full-time employees, mostly based here in DC. A couple of them, live throughout the country now that people can largely work remotely. Like our meeting planner, lives in San Antonio, and I have a data person who lives in Michigan, but largely people are based in DC, and we've got a 3-person congressional affairs team. We've got a 2-person kind of safety and regulatory team. We've got a 1-person general counsel and STB team. We've got a data and technology folks. We've got education folks, meeting planners. And so it's a pretty small, but I'd say small but mighty operation. And we try to be real efficient and productive with our finite resources and our members' dues.
Sounds like you got all the bases covered, though, and in every way to help your members. So you mentioned earlier about first mile, last mile when it comes to short line railroads. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that really is like the basis of what short lines do on an average day. And, at the risk of repeating a little bit of what I said earlier, if you think about it like this, you take an area in rural Tennessee, right, where it's got a Norfolk Southern main line 50 miles away, and then it's got a little ribbon of rail like all connecting to this rural town. For Norfolk Southern, it made no sense to keep that branch line. It's expensive infrastructure to maintain. They've got these $4 million locomotives. They've got 2 highly paid people in the cab of the locomotive. They've got they got dozens of trains on the main line. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to divert off the main line with this extremely expensive equipment, extremely expensive people, and then go serve like 3 customers in this rural area, right? It's just too time consuming. The numbers just don't work. But they didn't want to abandon it, right? And thank God they didn't, right? Nobody wants it abandoned. The customers don't want it abandoned. The regulators don't want it abandoned. Norfolk Southern doesn't want it abandoned, but they're just like, I can't make that work. So what do I do? And it turned out what they did was they sold or leased these lines to a local entrepreneur, right? And so that guy lives in that small town, right? He joins the Chamber of Commerce. He joins the Rotary Club. He sponsors the Little League. He knows every business owner in the town. He knows every parcel of land. And, when he goes and he figures like, well, how do I turn 3 customers into 4? And of the 3 customers I have, it's like, hey, John, I saw a truck pull up at your facility last Saturday. Like, why are you moving stuff by truck? I've got rail capacity for you. Like, talk to me. How can I help you? Do you need more cars? Do you need a different switch? Right. And so he can be like the retail branch of the business, right? If the class 1s are wholesale short lines can be retail and very friendly and like, and just easier to deal with, right? If you're a customer and you miss your pickup, or you need a second switch on Sunday, or you got a frustration with a rail car or whatever, if it's a class one, and again, these are like some of the world's great companies, so no shade, but you can't call the CEO of the class one railroad to complain about it, right? You got to deal with the portal and deal with the local train master, and it's up through 5 levels, and they've got a busy schedule to maintain, and it's tough. But if you got a problem with your short line, like, you have the cell phone number of the president of the railroad, and you can just call it, and he'll be like, oh my God, like, we missed a switch. Like, I'll come do it myself. Like, I'm embarrassed. And that's what short lines are kind of all about, this like friendly, local, kind of scrappy service. And they play this first mile, last mile role. And so generally, I'm talking about gathering up the traffic, but it works in reverse too. They can terminate the traffic, get it off of the main line, and then go bring the materials to a customer who's receiving it. And so that's the first mile, last mile. And that is really the basis of like what short lines are all about.
I love that you mentioned about how the owner would go and knock on doors, essentially. And I did that for years as a plant manager for railcar repair facilities. And when things were slow, I would always go out with my superintendent or whoever, jump in the truck, and I'd just say, follow the tracks. Just follow the tracks. There are people on this line that don't know we exist. So go down the line, start knocking on doors and say, do you know we provide services for you? Because you'd be surprised how many people don't. So I love that.
Yeah, I remember a tour I took of the Maryland and Delaware Railroad with their president at the time, who was a lady named Catherine Banks. And she put me in her pickup truck, and she's like, let's drive around. I'll show you. And we were kind of following the tracks and driving around town. And she's like, oh, that parcel of land, the Johnsons used to own that, but I think right now they're selling to a grocery store. But, that means that over there, the chicken facility is going to have an opportunity to grow their business, and we might be able to switch the cars. And, it's like literally like parcel by parcel, customer by customer, like, and you kind of build the business like one rail car at a time, like singles and doubles, right? They're not a lot of giant new multi-thousand car a year facilities that land on short lines. Occasionally they happen, and that's cause for tremendous celebration, but mostly it's like onesies and twosies, but you do it over and over and over again, and you multiply that by 600 short lines, and you multiply that by a couple decades, and collectively it's like actually quite a nice business.
Yeah, and you use another sports analogy. It's like stacking wins. You just keep stacking wins, and it all adds up. I totally agree. Well, per your website at ASLRRA.org, increased trucking and regulations starting in the 1920s caused many shortline railroads to close. But the Staggers Act, which you mentioned earlier, of 1980, ended most of the economic regulations and caused the rebirth of shortline railroads. So would you like to take a moment and just kind of talk about how deregulations actually helped to fuel the rebirth of the shortlines?
Yeah, that is really like a fundamental moment in the storytelling. And as we get farther and farther away from 1980, fewer and fewer people, really remember this stuff. And obviously I don't personally remember it, but it's part of the lore of shortline railroading. But this was Jimmy Carter at the end of his presidency, signed a couple of pieces of legislation that largely deregulated like a lot of the economic regulation of railroads, of trucking, and of airlines. And even though he's not, widely considered like a hugely successful president, these pieces of legislation are considered incredibly successful and very, very wise. The Staggers was named after a guy in Congress named Harley Staggers at the time, who was a key person on the Transportation Committee. But essentially it, like you said, it partially deregulated railroads and really enabled the story I just told, where class ones had branch lines that weren't profitable. They didn't want to keep investing in it. They couldn't justify it. They couldn't serve it, but they didn't want to abandon it, and they weren't allowed to abandon it either. So rather than being stuck in this like paralysis or stasis, Staggers essentially allowed them to be much more entrepreneurial about what they would do with it. And that essentially created this boomlet, we'll call, of spinning off these lines to short lines, right? And some of them were sold, and some of them were leased long term. A lot of them were leased for like $1. right? Because it was like the class one was literally like, I can make zero. I'm making no money on this. I'm in fact losing money on this, but I don't want to abandon it. And if you short line can take it and grow the traffic and go feed it to me, like, God bless you. Like, that's a win. Like, you don't have to pay me, you got to pay me $1 so we can have a contract, but that's about it. And that's really what created the modern version of short line railroads. And, to shorthand, no pun intended, that is essentially the story I tell about short lines. That is not 100% comprehensive. Like, there were certainly short lines that existed before 1980, and there are some short lines that go back 100 years and just always been small standalone short lines. But largely, when people say short line, like, they're talking about a sort of a modern phenomenon created in the wake of the Staggers Act.
Yeah, and actually, when I lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as a plant manager for a repair facility there, I was blessed to be on the Rail Users Advisory Council, which was with the Class 1s in the area, as well as the people that were needing rail service. They were providing products and such. That was really interesting because I got to hear a lot of this as it was happening, where the railroads were creating short lines or spurs or what have you for sale that people could purchase and then take on and run. So I got to kind of see how the sausage was made, which was really a lot of fun. And just to give some numbers, again, I know our audience loves numbers. So over the ensuing years since the Staggers Act, thousands of miles of track have been saved from abandonment, as you said earlier, and hundreds of communities have been able to maintain and advance their economies thanks to the continued rail service. By 2002, the short line industry had grown to 545 railroad companies operating over 29% of all U.S. rail mileage and responsible for 25% of the total rail freight handled on the Class 1 railroads. Today, short lines operate more than 50,000 miles of track, or 30% of the nation's total railroad mileage. And as you said earlier, there's 603 short line railroads who employ 20,000 people, serving 13,000 facilities and hauling more than 14 million carloads per year. One carload of every 4 is served in origin or destination by a short line railroad. That's truly incredible, and I don't think much of our audience knew that before today. So on your website, you refer to short line railroads as an American success story. You've talked about it at great length, so we don't have to get into it again. If you don't want to, that's fine. But it's just an amazing opportunity that people had that seized it, and it was not an easy one. Like you said, they had to really believe in what they were doing and go knock on doors, and they sure did. And now we have 603 different success stories out there, which I think is truly amazing.
Yeah, just to interject there, if you talk to some of the people who have made short lines a success and you ask them about the early years of this, probably the most common thing I hear is that they say some version of like, everybody told me I was crazy, right? It's like, they're taking these lines that you've got a Class 1 railroad, right, that has been in business for 150 years, that runs one of the, Fortune 500, one of the world's most successful transportation companies. And they're like, I can't make it work. This line, it's no good. There's not enough customers. The bridges are too expensive to maintain. Like, do you want it? You can have it for $1, right? And you had these people who are like, I'll take it. I'll make it work. And people were like, the frequent refrain is like, you're crazy. Like, you're going to go out of business. This is super expensive. You've got all this, you've got $100 million worth of infrastructure to fix, and you've got $1 million worth of revenue coming in. Like, you couldn't be more upside down. Like, you have no chance. And then they just scrapped it together and made it work, right? Like, there's local grants, there's federal grants, there's used locomotives, used rail, there's knocking on every door. And there's, like what we talked about earlier, just stacking little wins, band-aiding some of the infrastructure, and just kind of like survive one more year. And then eventually, you look up and you're like, oh, wait, like, I have a little bit of a profit. Like, I can invest more. And then, and then it grows and grows. But it is quite a unique kind of an American success story.
It really is. And I remember, you probably remember this too, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of military bases that were shutting down, many of which had rail, many of which had their own locomotives. and it was just kind of up for grabs. And I know of one in Illinois that became and it's still there, a thriving facility for storage, and it became its own short line. So I think there was a lot of really cool stories like that as well. And I remember going into some of those facilities going, wow, I never even knew this existed, and it was massive, and a huge operation. The one in particular I'm thinking of, I think they built the Patriot missiles there. So it was kind of neat to see some of the buildings that they used, and then we were able to convert that all into railcar repair facilities, cleaning facilities, and so forth. And then somebody created a short line there as well. What would you say are the hallmarks of a short line? You kind of touched on it already, but what are the hallmarks of short line railroads?
Yeah, I have touched on it some, but I would say they're sort of scrappy, entrepreneurial, friendly, and really kind of like just bend over backwards to say yes. The CEO of RJ Corman, which is a short line holding company and also does derailment business and contracting business, used to say that when the customer asks a question, the answer is yes, and then I'll go figure out how to do it later, right? And it's the same thing. I think I already used this analogy, but it's like if the customer needs a second switch on Sunday morning and it wasn't in the operating plan, well, like the president of the railroad will come out and switch the car himself. Right, it is a real kind of hands-on, get your hands dirty, figure out a way to say yes, be friendly, be innovative, and they just are, they're just obsessed with trying to grow volume and just one more car. And it's not, it's not only because like they're great people. Like this is just the nature of the business. Like they have this expensive infrastructure, they've got capacity. It's not too busy, right? If it was too busy, frankly, it would have still been a class one railroad, right? Like the class ones have main lines that don't always have open spaces. So they, for better or for worse, sometimes they're a little choosy about like what business they want to go after versus what doesn't make sense. Short lines are not choosy, right? They will take every car they can find. They will price it to find a way to get the business. They will find a way to serve it. And they will bend over backwards to be real innovative because like they got to find a way to pay for this infrastructure and keep the lights on and grow the place. And that's really their imperative. So they, everything is about how do I take care of this infrastructure and how do I get one more car?
Speaking of being friendly too, I remember having Thanksgiving dinners with a lot of the guys from the short line, guys and gals from the short lines that served our shops in the past, or luncheons or what have you. I mean, we knew each other. You were friends with these people, which isn't always possible because some of the larger railroads are so darn busy, which is okay. We're all working in this together, but the short lines have a very unique relationship, I think, with communities for sure.
Yeah, and it's also for sure with their communities and with their customers. And then blessedly, it's also with each other, right? Another one of the reasons my job is so lovely sometimes is, if you think of a short line in Ohio and then a short line in Texas, they're really not competing with each other in any meaningful way. They're really actually partners in a big network business. So the short line in Ohio is rooting for the short line in Texas and vice versa, because if they grow, well, that's more traffic on the rail network, and maybe that ends up, on my railroad on the other side of the move. And so they're also very friendly with each other. They're very open with sharing best practices and sharing their stories and just, kind of hanging out with each other. And so if you ever come to a ASLRRA event, you will be sort of blown away by like, boy, all these people are friends. Like they're all at the bar together. They're all having a great time. They're all sharing stories. They all seem to know each other. And so that's it's not like, I don't know, if you think of like a trucking conference or an airline conference, like they're in the same industry, but they're also like competing on every route. But railroads, like short lines by their nature, like you really can only compete on or near your own track. So like short line in Georgia and a short line in New Mexico, like they're really not competitors in any way. That makes sense.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And with you working and being based in Washington, D.C., you work with government agencies every day. And as we record this episode today, we're still in a government shutdown. So how does a government shutdown impact our industry, specifically the short lines and regional railroads?
Yeah, that's not the most fun question I've gotten because the shutdown is just kind of depressing, frankly. I will say, really, as short lines, it's not a huge deal, right? For a given railroad, um, the main way you would interact with the federal government on a daily basis is the safety inspectors, and those folks are considered essential, so they're not furloughed. They're working every day. They're working without a paycheck for now, and assuming that they'll get back pay. But so they're functioning, and that part's normal. And then for the rest of the kind of the government, the main way that short lines would interact with them is through grants, through policy development, through the regulatory side. And that's a business that tends to not be like super time sensitive. So, if you've won a Chrissy grant or you're applying for one, you certainly want to keep it moving, but frankly, the process moves pretty slowly anyway. And so if the government is shut down for a month, it adds a month, 2 months to the process, but you don't always notice that in the span of a 2-year deal anyway. So on the railroad side, like not a huge daily effect, but on the, just taking off my railroad hat, just as a citizen, it's a pretty embarrassing thing to have your government kind of unable to open. And, I certainly get the Democratic talking points, and I certainly get the Republican talking points, and both sides seem convinced they're winning, which is why we're 28 days into this shutdown as we record with not a lot of progress, because both sides think they're winning. I think they're both losing, and the American people are losing. And I sure wish there was more of an impetus and an interest in getting together and compromising and finding a way to have both sides take half a loaf and reopen the government. But it's also way above my pay grade. So,
well, when you say winning, I'm having Charlie Sheen flashbacks.
Hashtag winning.
Right, exactly. Which probably makes about as much sense. So mergers and acquisitions are a hot topic right now, specifically regarding Class 1 railroads such as UP and NS. I'm assuming that short line and regional railroads experience mergers and acquisitions too, but we just don't hear about them very often. Is that correct?
That definitely is correct. There are, like we said, 600 short lines, and there is a pretty steady drumbeat of them changing hands, right? Like a lot of them are family owned, and you'll have the dad or the granddad, kind of getting to retirement age, and maybe he doesn't have a kid who wants to take it over, or maybe he does, but he wants to kind of monetize his lifetime of hard work. And so people look to buy, and sometimes people look to sell, and it has been frankly a pretty attractive business for the last couple decades at this point. So there is no shortage of buyers for any short line that is sort of on the market, right? Most of the holding companies, Genesee and Wyoming, Watco, Omnitrax, RJ Corman, Jaguar, Pinsley, Regional Rail, Progressive, I'm sure I'm missing a couple, are typically like in the market looking to expand because they're like, hey, I already do this with 5 railroads or 10 railroads, and I know what I'm doing, and I love doing it, and I want to do it with one more. And that would be an efficient way to add on to my business, even if the line doesn't, connect to the one I have. So there are a lot of transactions. I would say the good news is they tend to make very, very little difference on the ground, right? Like, so you'll have like the ownership change hands, but what the short line itself is doing, like you would almost never know, right? It's going to be the same locomotives, the same people serving the same customers, and really in most cases, and I certainly hope it is, with the same kind of great attitude and friendly vibe, because there's really no other way to do the business. And so there are a ton of changes at the ownership level. Like I'm always meeting new owners and new CEOs, but when you talk to customers and you talk to regulators and you talk to city councilmen and people like that, like they frequently don't even know who owns the railroad. They just know the brand and the people on the ground and kind of what it looks like and feels like. And there's an awful lot of stability on that side.
Well, and I want to get into your website next because there's so much amazing stuff on there. But before we get into that, I did have one other thought on the mergers and acquisitions. So the STB. So I know the class ones have to go through an arduous process with the STB when they want to do a merger acquisition. But do short lines have to go through the same process? Because they're not really having the same interchange kind of discussions, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, you're correct. There is in general, sort of an exemption process that they call it. And so if a short line is taking control of another short line, as long as they don't connect to each other, it tends to be like 30 days, no real review, kind of no problem, right? So if the same company that already owns a short line in Georgia is now buying one in Utah, I think from the government's point of view, it's like, what's there to regulate? Like there's no additional market power. They don't connect. It doesn't change any interchange issues. It doesn't change any traffic. And it probably doesn't, there's really nothing to worry about. And so it is a far, far shorter process that really rarely requires kind of any level of STB interaction.
Very good. And now let's jump into your website, because there's a bunch of good stuff on there for members. And it's at ASLRRA.org. You've got member resources. So you've got Short Line Training Center, member discount program, which sounds interesting, Career Center, which is always good. And you mentioned earlier about the CRISI grant application information. So can you take a moment and just tell our audience, what is the CRISI grant?
Yeah, so CRISI stands for Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. And so it's a federal grant program, so it's managed out of the FRA. It's been around for coming up on 10 years right now. And so it started in like 2017, I want to say. And it started at a couple $100 million a year, which is obviously good money. And then the big infrastructure, the IIJA, the big infrastructure bill in 2021, really supercharged it, and that took it up over $1 billion per year. And so the C, again, stands for consolidated. So it took basically a bunch of old grant programs and combined them into one. It is not only for short lines, sadly. We have to compete. Intercity passenger rail projects are eligible, and short line projects are eligible, and then you can do grade crossings, you can do block crossings, you can do technology development. But at its core, like about half of the program has gone to short lines over the years. And most short lines use it for pretty simple, like blocking and tackling, meat and potato type rail projects, like upgrade the track, replace old rail with newer rail, replace old ties with newer ties, spread new ballast, fix a bridge. And it's basically, it is a real godsend to short lines. Because again, and we've now hit this like 3 times already, but like the origin story of short lines about buying these old lines or leasing them is one of the reasons the class ones leased them was because it was like 70 miles of tough infrastructure going to only a couple of customers. And so, the class ones like, boy, this is never going to generate enough revenue to fix this bridge, for instance. And even with all the magic the short line can do about one more customer and one more carload and used locomotive, it is still sort of a fundamental problem that like it in fact does not generate enough revenue to fix that $10 million bridge. But there is a real public policy interest in fact having that bridge fixed, because America wants this short line railroad to still exist and still serve this community. So the grant program can allow a short line to apply and win like a $10 million grant to go fix that bridge. And so they can be really transformative, kind of life-saving or company-saving, kind of crucial infrastructure investments. And we think it's a phenomenal success story. It's been very popular on a bipartisan basis. The Biden administration liked it. The Trump administration likes it. Republicans in Congress like it. Democrats in Congress like it. Everyone seems to like it. The program makes a ton of sense. And so that's what CRISI is. And we spend an awful lot of time talking about CRISI, bragging about CRISI, telling our members how to apply for CRISI, telling the FRA they should hurry up and do CRISI, telling Congress they should fund more CRISI. I mean, if I had to count the number of times I've said CRISI in the last 6 years of this job, it would be like, it could be in the tens of thousands, like truly.
But it sounds like it's well worth the discussion. And if people need help with the application process, they can get that through the website, which I think is unreal. That's great. And we also have safety and compliance information on the website, safety training resources, compliance templates, safety alerts, reports, and advisories, which are very important. Disaster preparedness, which is also very important, especially down here in the South with hurricanes and tropical storms and such. Safety awards, which you mentioned earlier. Lots of education opportunities, Shortline Training Center, webinars, which we'll talk about in a minute, drug and alcohol education materials, training seminars, education fund, and industry scholarships. And we all love those industry scholarships. I want to jump to advocacy real quick. So can you take a moment and give us a high-level overview of the type of advocacy you provide? Because you do a lot of that.
Yeah, so I certainly just hit on a big one, the CRISI grants, right? And so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. This is, at its core, the main reason the association exists is to kind of advocate collectively for programs that individual short lines couldn't really muster the resources and the energy and the expertise to do on their own. And so we spent a lot of time advocating for CRISI grants, right? And so that you got to hit multiple levels. You got to advocate to Congress to create the program and then to fund the program. And that could be funded through guaranteed funds, which is through the authorizing committees, or it could be annual appropriations funds, which is through the appropriations committees. And then you have to advocate to the FRA to, when they've issued the NOFO, to choose, select as much as possible of short lines and as little as possible as our competitors. And obviously our competitors for the program are doing the exact same thing on the other side. It's a competitive policy world here in DC. One of my favorite sayings, because it's true, is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So, that's why, we're advocating, because if we're not doing it, there are other people who want different things than us who are taking the other side of that debate. Another big one that we spend a ton of time talking about is the 45G tax credit. So it's a federal tax credit that basically says for every dollar a short line spends, you can get a tax credit back for 40 cents per dollar up to $3,500 per mile. So if you're a short line, if you have 10 miles to track, right, you're eligible for a $35,000 annual federal tax credit, but you have to spend $87,500 to get the credit. And then it comes back to you on your taxes at the end of the year. And so that's a huge help to every short line, and lets a lot of short lines kind of survive and maintain their track. And so those are, and we're trying to advocate to modernize that, because it's very successful, but it's been $3,500 per mile for 20 years. And inflation has sort of eroded that away over time. And so we really need to increase that so it can continue to do what Congress, I think, wants it to do. So those are two of the highlights. We also spent a lot of time talking about truck size and weight laws. And that's one of the more contentious things we work on, because there are people who are very much on the other side of that fight. Like there are some heavy shippers of product that moves in truck, right? Like beverage, beer companies, lumber companies, some agricultural companies that, if you move 80,000 pounds of beer in a truck, if you could put 11,000 pounds more in there, and, you might think that's really good for your economics. We think that trucks already don't pay their fair share of road damage. And if you put more stuff in a truck, you're now going to shift the economics of rail versus truck even more. You're going to subsidize more freight going to truck. Now you're going to have worse roads. The taxpayers are going to subsidize it even heavier. And you're going to have, not to be crass, but you're going to have more people die, because you're going to have more people in truck, more freight in trucks, more trucks and heavier trucks. And so we say so loudly, but that's a big fight every year in Congress. And, I've had that fight every year for my 20 years. And I know that if my grandchildren's grandchildren are doing this job, they will be having that fight. So, that's kind of a forever battle, but those are some of the things we advocate on. And it is a full-time gig for, lots of people here in DC.
Oh, I bet it is. It's never ending, but it's job security, right? So
For sure.
You got that. But you also have all kinds of environmental initiatives on the website. And last but certainly not least, you have numerous events, including the Railroad Day on the Hill, which I have yet to attend, but I'm going to. Every year I say I'm going, and every year something comes up. But I promise I will make it to that. I've always wanted to do that. And you've also got a couple of events coming up here in November. Would you like to touch on those events that are coming up?
Yeah, we actually have our huge annual conference every year is in the spring, right? And so next one will be in Minneapolis in April 2026, and there'll be 2,000 people almost there. But we do two sort of smaller regional meetings in the fall, and those tend to be like 250, 300, 350 people. And so actually your timing is great. Just next week, our Central and Pacific regions are getting together and meeting in New Orleans. So we'll be there November 3rd to the 5th. So if you hear this before then and you are at a short line or want to sell to a short line or want to hang out with some short lines, it's not too late to register and show up, and we'd love to have you. And obviously all the info's on the website. And so that's, and we'll have education sessions and breakout tracks and receptions and all sorts of, chance to hang out with those friendly short line railroaders. And then the big one, like I mentioned, will be next spring in Minneapolis.
So do they have to be a member to attend?
You don't have to be a member, although like a typical membership association, we sort of price it in a way that strongly encourages you to be a member. We basically make it a lot more expensive if you're not a member because we want people to join. It's the nature of a membership-based association. It's really aimed at the members. That's the audience. But every year, there are people there who are not members just kind of trying it out for the first time. And blessedly, I can report the return rate is like 90+%. So most people who come are like, oh yeah, that's a place I have to be.
Yeah, and I'm sure they can sign up for memberships online, or they can probably do it right there at the event, I would assume.
Oh yeah, we make it pretty easy to join. So we want to have you. And then the Railroad Day on the Hill is a super fun one. It's it's probably kind of obvious what it is by the title, but it's a big advocacy day in DC. And and a lot of the advocacy throughout the year is me and my, the staff of the association, and then the few kind of short lines that have full-time government affairs people or in DC or who come to DC. But once a year, we do this big Railroad Day on the Hill, and we have like 300 or 400 people come into DC, and we schedule like 300 Hill meetings for them, and they kind of swarm Capitol Hill in groups of 5 or 6, and go and tell the story, and we have materials, and it is really fun, like citizen lobbyist for the day, and tell the short line story, and we talk about tax credits and truck size and weight and safety regulations and all the stuff that kind of matters to railroads in a regulatory and legislative context. And it's we've been doing that for decades, and it works pretty well.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, they pair you with the representative from your state as well, so you can really have a direct impact during the day that you're there with the conversations you'll be having.
Right. That's right.
So I really want to encourage everybody to check out your website. Again, it's at ASLRRA.org. Lots of information on there. Sorry we had to kind of blow through it for the sake of time, but there is lots and lots of good information on there, so please go check that out. So I got a few more questions for you before we go. So
Sure.
what is your favorite part of our industry?
It is really like, it's kind of like the salt of the earth, entrepreneurial, like the people who were told they were crazy when they started this, and being there to help realize their dream. And I take no credit, right? Like I wasn't there at the beginning. I wasn't the crazy entrepreneur risking my family name and fortune and career to do something that people said was crazy. I get to kind of come in late stage and be like, when it's already a success, and just tell the story. But these people are just such legends in my mind, and to be able to kind of represent them is an honor.
What advice would you give a young person wanting to follow in your footsteps in government affairs?
That's a fun question too. I would say there is a real, this is probably tried and true advice. Like this is like a version of the Sheryl Sandberg lean in, but it's like before you have kids and before you're married, when you can do it, is like, you got to go work your ass off, right? Like when you have time to do it, that's your time for 70, 80-hour weeks and extra learning and showing up at conferences you weren't even invited to and going and sitting in on talks and just learning. And, if you make an effort and show up, like, you are so far ahead of most people so quickly. Like most people, and I don't mean to be a jerk, but most people are kind of lazy and like not that great, right? So like if you come and like make a real effort, and it does not require being a genius. Like I'm not a genius. Like many of the most successful people that I know here are not, like, wouldn't win any IQ contest, but they show up and they try, and you put yourself ahead of most people pretty quickly. And then the other one, and this is maybe in the shortest supply in DC, is like, be nice to people. Like really, like, first of all, life is too short to go around being a jerk to people, but also you just never know, right? It's like the same person you see on their way down, like in a year, you're going to be on the way down and they're going to be on the way up. And when you're nice to people, especially people who you don't quote unquote need to be nice to, they remember that forever. And it's just a more pleasant way to be, and the whole world would be a better place if people would just be nice to each other. So, I don't want to be corny about it, but like that really helps.
I totally agree. And that's one of the things I love about our industry is it's large in volume, but it's small in leadership. So we all really know one another. It's very much of a family kind of feel. And I love that about our industry for sure. So believe it or not, we're nearing the end of our episode already. It's been an hour. It's gone by so fast, but what else would you like to share with our audience before we go today?
Go Ravens.
Wow. John, edit that part out.
You know what? These were fabulous questions. I was honored to be on. I think you've covered it pretty well. I think I got in most of the stuff. Like we've talked about the nature of short lines, the people who created them, the interaction with the class ones, what we do in DC, although, the events we have. I'd welcome people reaching out to me or to anyone else at the association, or for that matter, reach out to your local short line. They try to make themselves easy to find. They're very, very friendly. And there is nothing that a railroader enjoys more than talking about their railroad. So, don't hesitate to talk to them about it.
You are absolutely right. I'm sure I bore people to death at times. The funny thing is, usually what I get when I tell people what I do for a living, they say, people still use railroads?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think today's episode is so important, to hear about the short lines and to hear about those 603, entrepreneurs that went out there and took that risk, and everyone that joined them on that risk. I'll tell you what, when I created a company for a private equity group years ago, it took people taking a leap of faith with me. It wasn't just me. It was all them risking, leaving their families at home to travel with me and do all this other stuff. So it takes the whole group to be on board with that. But how can people contact you if they have any questions for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our website makes it pretty easy to contact us. My email is cbaker@ASLRRA.org. And I think we put all of our emails right on our website on like the About Us section. We have our mainline phone number that somebody will pick up and direct you to the right person. And we're certainly not trying to hide. If you just pop onto ASLRRA.org, we make it pretty easy to find us.
And we'll make sure to put that information on the podcast, the show notes and key points as well, so people can find you pretty easily. So would you like to join us again on a future episode?
I'd be happy to. I'd also be happy to help you find some, actual short line railroaders who can give you, like the absolute on the ground, dirt under their fingernails version of short line railroading. And I know some who would be more than happy to talk to you for an hour.
That would be great. We love dirt under the fingernails. Yeah. It's the American way. Well,
right.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay tuned. Stay with us for just a moment. We're going to jump into my 2 cents. So we hear about Class 1 railroads all the time, right? But we rarely hear about these 603 short line railroads that service nearly 10,000 customers over 50,000 miles of track, employing 17,800 railroaders nationwide and contribute nearly $5 billion to the U.S. economy. Many of the railcar repair shops that I've run over the years were served by short line railroads like the Crandwick Railroad in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And they say when it comes to consumer goods, think a railroader, right? Well, I agree with that. Just don't forget to think a short line railroader too. That's my 2 cents. So I want to thank everybody from the AR 10 car committee and the meetings there I guess it was 2 weeks ago now when we're recording this in Dallas, Texas. Every meeting since we've had the podcast, there's more and more people that walk up to me and say, we love the podcast. Now, when I first started this, it was, you do what? There's a podcast for our industry. And now it's gotten to the point where people know the podcast, come up, say hello. And it was so neat because you guys, you know who you are. I'm not going to mention your names. I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but coming up to me and shaking my hand, introducing me to your coworkers and even introducing me to your spouses. That was really cool. So please feel free to do that whenever you see me at a conference or an event. I'll be sure to try and always mention that on the podcast where I'll be next. I'm done with conferences for this year until through the holidays, I think. But you're always welcome to come say hi. Some of you even recognize my voice from behind me and came up and gave me a hug. I think that's pretty darn cool. So thank you guys. Really appreciate that. Please continue to say hello when you see me or hear me at these conferences. We do not have a FEMSA update this month, but that's on me. I got so darn busy. I got behind on reaching out to them. Plus, I don't know how they're affected right now with the government shutdown we talked about, but I will make sure to reach out to them again prior to our next episode. So stay tuned for FEMSA updates. I would also like to take a moment again and recognize our anchor sponsor, the Revolution Rail Group. So that's me. We provide consulting and brokering services in the railcar industry, serving any kind of consulting services, whether it's market analysis, process flow analysis, merger and acquisition assistance. We can help you with that. We can also help you with buying, selling, leasing, or subleasing of railcars. You can reach out to us today at 844-455-3434 or info@therevolutionrailgroup.com. You can also check out our full suite of services on our website at therevolutionrailgroup.com. So stay tuned for next month's episode. You're going to love our guest next month as well. And then we've got our next Christmas episode coming up here pretty soon. So it was hugely successful last year. We had Peyton Riley and Bubba Wesley, country music artists, come on and sing Christmas songs and talk about railroading and Christmas and what it all meant to them growing up, because everybody had trains around their Christmas tree, right? And so we have a very special guest coming on for this Christmas special, as well as maybe two. We'll see what I can work out here, but you're going to love it. So with that said, God bless, make it a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the American Railroading Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover on a future episode or want to support or sponsor the show, please visit our website at AmericanRailroading.net. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the American Railroading Podcast.